let's get this going. So in 2008, Cyclone Nargis, it's Nargis, Cyclone Nargis ripped through Southeast Asia. One of the countries that was hardest hit was Myanmar, and when I say it was hardest hit, what I mean more precisely is that it had the highest level of social and population upheaval as a result of deaths and damage to infrastructure. Over 140,000 people were killed, and another 2 million people were affected through displacement, loss of homes, and loss of livelihoods. But this isn't just a story about a disaster striking people and people being affected. This is a story about people and their government. In Myanmar, the government set up a blockade after a cyclone and refused to allow aid into the country to help their people. There are a lot of reasons for this that I can't really get into with any sort of historical justice, but two kind of large general ideas can give you a good overview of what was going on. The Republic of Myanmar government, or more appropriately the military junta, did not want to admit that it was in need. At the time, it was trying to project this image of competence and independence and self-efficacy, and so admitting that they needed aid in the aftermath of this cyclone was tantamount to admitting that they were incapable of ruling themselves. The second thing was that most of the people who were harmed by Cyclone Nargis were members of an oppressed underclass. In the midst of civil war, this was an oppressed population that some were trying to eradicate. Blocking aid to these people was seen as blocking aid to people they didn't really care about if they lived or died anyway. So obviously this is a tragedy, this is a travesty, and this is the sort of thing that I'm talking about when I say that where you live determines in large part your vulnerability to climate change. Some societies are more vulnerable because they live on land that is more vulnerable, or they're in a hurricane path, or in the ring of fire. But some societies are more vulnerable because the structure of the society itself is set up in a way that it does not or it cannot protect its people, and it may even be actively trying to harm its people. A country that is ravaged by civil war is unlikely to be preparing adequately for climate change. A country with an actively oppressed underclass or that is experiencing genocide is unlikely to be adequately preparing for climate change. And a people who have been experiencing oppression at the hands of their government or authority in general are unlikely to trust that the authority can protect them from anything or will protect them from anything, much less from climate change. And a great example of this is Hurricane Katrina. So a little background here. African Americans first joined the United States by force as slaves. They were not considered people, they were considered property. Then they were considered 3/5 people. And then they were freed, but then there was Jim Crow laws that were actively oppressing them. Then the Jim Crow laws were eradicated, but they're still experiencing direct and institutionalized oppression. Then we have the civil rights movement. It gains power and support. We have integration, affirmative action. But even today, as far as we have come, even today, we still have untold examples of systemic and direct racism and oppression serving as passive and active obstacles to African Americans in their everyday lives. Things are better, yes, but we are not done yet with this. We still have a long way to go. So Hurricane Katrina happened in 2005, but if you ignore the previous 500 years, you are missing the context in which Hurricane Katrina happened. There are a lot of people who have been actively discriminated against in their lives, whose parents and grandparents were actively oppressed, whose great-great-grandparents were slaves. They don't have the luxury of assuming that government and authority in general have their best interests at heart in their lives and in the lives of their forebears. That has not been the case. When Hurricane Katrina happened, people who do have that luxury, meaning people who, as individuals and as an ethnic, racial, and cultural group, have not experienced this act of oppression by our government and who therefore have the luxury of trust in our government, those people said that it was coincidence only that people who were poor and black were left behind in a lake of sewage and bodies for days. It was just a coincidence that those were the people that this happened to. There was no design. It just happened. People who don't have that luxury of trust must assume that things like this either happen by design or at the very least they are allowed to happen because those in authority just don't care enough to stop it. To be perfectly clear, if you and your family have experienced active and passive oppression for hundreds of years, it is absolutely rational and reasonable to not trust the people who have been oppressing you. Just like if you and your family have not been oppressed for hundreds of years, it is absolutely rational and reasonable to trust the people who haven't been oppressing you. These are both reasonable perspectives, and they were both perspectives in the aftermath of Katrina. So maybe some of you who are doing your papers on Katrina may want to weigh in on this in the discussion forum, but these were, I guess, kind of competing ideas of what happened and why things happened as they did in Katrina in the days and weeks afterwards. My point is, though, is that people who already didn't trust the government or trust authority, who were left in that lake of sewage for days, responded negatively to the government and the authority when they then came in to help. People were evacuated at gunpoint because they refused to go, because from their perspective, the people who let this happen were the ones who were now trying to evacuate them. So why would I trust these people now when they've left me here in sewage for days? This is one of the other important considerations with region, oppression, and trust. If you have no reason to trust your government, will you believe in them and work with them in their climate change mitigation and adaptation preparations? Will you work with them in the aftermath of a disaster, or will you assume that they're not really trying to help you at all, but that there's some ulterior motive that could be actively harming you? Another thing, one final note, there are different estimates in numbers of the future of climate change refugees. I've heard 10% of the population of the world may be displaced by the end of this century. Some of them displaced within their country, but other people, entire countries, are going to be displaced as well. So first of all, this is going to destabilize the world. That much upheaval and movement of populations, it's going to be a major issue. It's a security issue, and there's also just, what are people going to do? This is going to be a big thing. But also, we in the first world tend to think of refugees as something that is temporary. There's a war, people are displaced for a little while, but then they go back home afterwards. But in reality, this oftentimes isn't the case at all. Oftentimes, when refugee camps are established, there is nowhere for people to go afterwards. There's nowhere to put people afterwards. They can't go home anymore because their homes don't exist. And other countries won't take them because they're jobless and they're broke and it's a drain on resources. So refugee camps are remarkably long-lasting. I'm talking decades. There are people, adults, who were born in refugee status, who continue to be refugees as adults. And this is it's an in-between life. There's no property ownership. There may or may not be family or social networks. There's no material wealth. There's no jobs, no options. And there's no control over what happens next in your life. Because sometimes for very long periods of time, you don't have the ability to plan for your future because you don't have control over what's going to happen to you in your future. Refugee camps they're very long-lasting, but it's unstable. It's not considered a stable population because governments can't form, people can't have jobs and create infrastructure and resources. When regions become unstable because of war or disaster, whatever social structure previously existed does not exist any longer. Everything changes. And so this is one of the issues to consider when you're looking at your readings with refugee status, with governments, with trust, with structure of developing nations, their ability to have infrastructure, the way that people interact with their people, with people from other countries, things like this. So Section 2 of your paper is due on Saturday, the 22nd. The syllabus calls for this section to consider how your topic relates to cultural community psychology. Now, I've discussed with some of you about how your papers are going to be different, and that's fine. Don't feel afraid that I'm talking about this if we've already discussed you writing about something different. But for most of you, I want you to consider the psychology of your topic. How do our perceptions, our behaviors, our beliefs affect how people interact with your topic? Consider different cultural psychologies, and also consider the contextual influences of psychology. If you're in doubt, go back to the readings, remember all the discussions that we've had, go back to the forums, and as always, I'm available for meetings in my office and also on Skype or email, whatever, so yeah, just let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you all online.